Hurlford is a town in East Ayrshire on the outskirts of Kilmarnock with a population of approximately 4,850. It is a busy commuter town and a meeting point for main spine roads throughout Scotland. The River Irvine runs through Hurlford, which poses a risk of flooding for some areas in the surrounding town. The area was assessed and 3 areas of risk were identified. Social and environmental effects were considered and the effects that flooding would have on transport. Flood modelling is shown for 5 main flood events, showing the extent and depth of the floods and the areas affected. The greatest difference can be observed between a 1 in 2.33 year event and a 1 in 50 year event. An animation is shown here which shows the progress of floodwaters in a 1 in 200 year event. The A71 passes directly through Hurlford, which is a major link between Edinburgh and Ayr. The A76 to Dumfries begins at Hurlford and the A77 Glasgow to Stranraer also passes through. It has been estimated that the cost to the economy from the closure of a major road in Scotland is approximately £100,000 per day. The transport network underpins the economic competitiveness and social functionality of the town. The area at the greatest risk of road closure due to flooding is the roundabout connecting the A71, A76 and A77. The B7073 will be severely affected by a 1 in 50 year event, as can be seen here. Potential problems connecting with road obstructions and closures include delays and diversions, which lead to increased fuel consumption and congestion. Motorists may attempt to drive through flooded areas at a high risk to their vehicles and themselves. A railway line running from Glasgow to Carlisle passes through this area and is at risk of flooding. Closures of railway lines can prevent work commutes and general travel. Farmland makes up a large proportion of the land surrounding the River Irvine in the Hurlford area. Flooding can prove costly to agriculture as it can cause reduction and delay in crops. Crops need water in order to flourish and survive, but an oversaturation of the soil can cause oxygen and nutrients to become less bioavailable. River flooding can cause the extents of a river to extend into these fields where pesticides may have been used. This can cause the introduction of these toxic chemicals into the water and can consequently have an adverse, destructive effect on aquatic life. The River Irvine is home to an extensive population of fish including salmon, trout, eels, stone loach, minnow, stickleback and lamprey. The poisoning of fish puts predators such as eagles, harriers and otters at risk. Floodwaters can provide fish with larger feeding grounds and access to nutrients and animals normally inaccessible. However, abated floodwaters can leave fish trapped with no direct route to return to the main water course. Floodplain mammals such as otters and water voles are put at risk of being flushed out of their habitat and becoming easy prey to larger predators. Floodwaters can have a positive effect on plant populations, as seeds can be transferred downstream and new populations and greater numbers can be achieved. However, there is a risk of the presence of invasive species such as giant hogweed, knotweed species and Himalayan balsam being further spread by flooding. Social effects can be divided into 2 categories, socio-economic and psychosocial. The economic effect of flooding is well publicised. However, it is equally important to consider the psychosocial effects of flooding. such as the mental health of those affected. One of the first stages in assessing the social impact of the flooding is to consider the most vulnerable groups. In this area, two groups were considered to be particularly vulnerable: the elderly, those of which are over 65, which makes up over 20% of the overall population in the area, and the young, those aged 15 or younger, which represents around 17% of the overall population. It has been found that both these groups have high rates of deteriorating mental health after a flood event. Flooding causes damage to property and its contents. To mitigate this, adequate insurance must be purchased. Due to this high cost of premium insurance, many of those who are on low income cannot afford the cost and therefore do not have cover for when flood events occur. With 35% of the population situated in social housing in Hurlford, one of the main concerns is occupants who may choose to go without certain types of insurance and fall into deeper poverty while funding for lost or damaged contents. When a flood occurs, there is a limited number of both human and inanimate resources. Therefore, for governing bodies responsible for dealing with flood, it is essential to identify and prioritise the most vulnerable to the flood event and the aftermath. An individual who does not have family and alternative accommodation will require support and shelter. In Hurlford, this would most likely be the Hurlford Community Centre. Although it may not be the biggest concern in time of flooding, such an event can impact the social activities of the residents. There is a large bowling club that is highly susceptible to flooding, which could affect the social life of many of its members, as well as a number of public houses and restaurants that are at risk. There is also places of worship in the area that could flood, two of which are listed buildings.